Hello, hello. We are live, and this is Courtney and Rhonda and Oz. And joining us tonight is Steve Hoffman for U.S. Senate, running under the Freedom Socialist Party. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. Hi, how you doing?
Good, thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. And you have been active in unions quite a bit. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yes, I've been members of unions for a long time. I was a member in the shipyards for a few years, and I've been working at North Seattle College for the last 27 years as I'm maintaining electrical systems and stuff. And I've been a shop steward for a long time. I've been a member of the Washington Federation of State Employees Local 304. And I'm also the recording secretary for my local union and delegate to the Labor Council. And the kind of the thing I am most involved with is closest to my heart is being a shop steward, actually, where I represent workers on the job, and I often support members, often women who are standing up to bullying on the job and stuff like that. So that's my neighbor. I'm also a member of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists and Organized Workers for Solidarity. In those groups, I organize with the broader community and connect it to labor.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And then we like to go through, we have a small list, and it's in no specific order, but we just want to get it out. We like to get it up front these days. I'm going to go through this list, and we can do it fairly quickly. I'll say something like schools, and then you'll tell me whether or not you think that should be socialized, privatized, or a combination. Is that all right with you?
Okay.
Okay. And then what we can do is also use your answers. If there's any surprises or questions that we have in regards to your answers, we can then follow up with that. But if you have something you want to say about it more too, then we'll have time for that as well.
Okay.
So our list starts with prisons.
Well, they should be publicly owned and operated. There should be a lot less of them, but they should be. I'm not for privately owned prisons at all.
Yeah. Okay, and schools?
Well, I'm for publicly operated, socialized public schools. I'm a strong advocate for public schools. I know some people go to charter schools, but I think it takes too much money away. They should be making the public schools better and having enough teachers and giving them enough funding.
Absolutely. And healthcare?
Well, I'm for a totally socialized system. I think a single payer would be an advance and would be good, but I think it would be better to have it just completely government run under the control of the workers and the doctors and the nurses and the patients with a democratic control. And I think a socialized system is better.
Thank you. And then Postal Service.
Well, I'm going to say things pretty much every time should be publicly operated. I mean, because I'm a public worker and I'm a socialist. And I'm pretty much against privatization. So I know a lot of postal services are.
There's some noise here. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, I muted you, Supreet. It was a little noisy.
Okay, so do you want me to rattle off the list, and you can tell me if there's anything on there that you would not privatize or would be open to a binary system?
You can rattle off the list. That is pretty much socialized, not privatized.
Okay, so utilities, water, public lands, and natural resources.
Oh yeah, public.
What about banks?
Yes, I would have public ownership of the banks because, right now they're using the banks, CEOs and corporations are sucking money out of the communities. We need to plow that money back in to developing lots more affordable housing and stuff instead of fraudulent securities and stuff like that, scams.
So we've got, go ahead.
All those things that we would nationalize would need to be under workers' control, where the democratic are run by the workers and with real accountability to the community and community input into how it's run and what's financed by the banks and what's going to meet the people's needs instead of, making money for the 1%.
Okay. I've got infrastructure, social security, military, and its associated industrial complex.
Well, yes, definitely Social Security, keep it public. I'm against privatizing any of that. What was the first one?
Infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we should have to pay a $5 toll to go buy groceries, I mean, that's a big tax on working people when they privatize things and charge you a toll. On the East Coast, you're paying tolls all the time.
Yeah, I've got a toll in Tacoma.
What the military industrial complex, well, I want to shut down the Pentagon. So, and close down all the military bases overseas. We got like 800 military bases at least, and that's if you don't count the little ones, and in 80 different countries. It's ridiculous. And so, I mean, I just think the whole war machine needs to be sent, and we just need a foreign policy based on worker solidarity. I mean, so much. I mean, over 50% of the budget goes to the war machine.
That's right.
But, whatever it is, I don't think that we should privatize to Halliburton or whatever. If you are going to have a military operation, it should be run publicly democratically by the soldiers, I would think, but I wouldn't, contract out things, because then if I contract out security, it becomes all about making money rather than, adhering to some kind of sane mission.
Okay. And then we've got internet and cell service, foster care, and libraries.
Well, I definitely want to keep the libraries public. I don't know if there's plans afoot. I always hear about city-owned. Why wouldn't we want to run the internet as a publicly owned utility like we do Seattle City Light? I mean, I think that would be a good idea. So I would support that.
Yeah, Tacoma has public utilities, and we have internet service through them as well.
Yeah, I would be for that.
Okay. And then let's see, foster care and child care.
I think foster care, I'm sure there just needs to be a lot more funding so that, and it's a better system. I know that often the people in my union state employees, some of the people who determine who goes into foster care, they're some of the lowest paid, and there's a really high turnover. And to me, the person who's determining who goes into foster care or not should be an experienced person. And, most people, because of the stress, the caseloads, because they're way understaffed and the low pay, most child protective service workers don't last more than a year on the job, which I think is terrible, But childcare should just be publicly provided, 24-hour free. And the rich people make enough money to pay some taxes so we can make that happen. And childcare, I don't know how women afford childcare. I mean, it could be like a lot of your wages.
The childcare is not unionized, so people don't pay their childcare providers much. That's how we've been doing that.
And it's still too expensive.
It should be unionized.
Yep. And so then we have mass transit, including buses, ferries, railways, and airways.
Yeah, I think that they all should be publicly owned and operated. And I mean, I think that the fares could be kept much lower. And I think the buses going to poor communities should be free fares. you know, and the transit and the trains and getting people to work. The corporations benefit from all those workers showing up at their work site to make them money. They can pay a head tax or whatever they have to do to fund it adequately. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I'm really not for this public-private partnership thing.
Yeah.
Us neither.
Yeah, we have, so space exploration, scientific funding, and elections.
I don't know too much of space exploration. I mean, I wouldn't make it a private thing. I mean, but scientific research, I mean, right now, the public funds all the scientific research on like pharmaceuticals, and then the pharmaceutical companies just turn it into a profit thing and get the patent, and they're making googads of money. Most of the research is done by publicly, you know, taxpayer-funded institutions. We should just have it, the taxpayers control the whole process rather than, you know, having to pay, you know, thousands of dollars for an EpiPen or something. And what was the other one was
elections.
Publicly financed, totally publicly financed elections. I mean, why should we have rich people buying elections? We see what that happens. Rich people buy elections. Rich people pass tax cuts that benefit rich people, wage wars that benefit corporations. Yeah, you see the results of that.
Yep. So then we have first responders, Veterans Administration, and community housing.
First responders, I mean, I don't know the issues that are usually publicly funded. I hope they would stay that way. They may need more staffing. I don't know. They certainly should stay unionized. And then I'm going to start writing down these lists because and second one was
Veterans Administration.
Yeah, the Veterans Administration, I'm against this privatization. They need to adequately staff it. Now, I was just talking to somebody today about that, and he is a veteran and he had cancer and heart surgery. He's a coworker of mine. He likes the doctors, but the bureaucracy kind of drives him crazy. So I think you could streamline the bureaucracy and make it more efficient and more accountable. But it's by really respecting the frontline workers who really want to help veterans, right? That's why they're there. And sometimes the bureaucracy just drives them crazy. So it could be more efficient, but it should just be kept public and adequately funded. Right now, the military, you know, sends soldiers back from war and, you know, they have PTSD. And so they act out and do something violent. And then they get a bad conduct discharge. And then they lose all their benefits with the VA because they had a bad conduct discharge from doing something that was a result of being sent to a war zone and a brutal experience. You know, and that stuff's got to end. Don't get me started on veterans. I mean, they're not treated like they should be.
Yeah.
No, they're not.
So there was community housing or housing in general?
I think that we need a massive increase in public housing. And so, and enough of this, you know, mixed thing, because when they do the mixed market rate public, not nearly as many people end up, poor people or people on low income, a lot of people in Seattle don't get back in. So I just think we need to triple or quadruple the amount of public housing in this country. And we can, you know, if we shut down the Pentagon, we'll have some money to do that.
Okay. And then my favorite question, because I was the first person I ever heard talk about it, so I brag about it a little bit. Caregivers' basic income. It's something, so if you are caring for children, age to be determined, but I know in Washington, the state does say once your child reaches 8, you either have to register them in school or as a homeschooler. So I've been loosely using 8 as the cutoff. If you have children under 8, you get a caregiver's basic income. If you're caring for an elderly person or an ill or sick person, if family or not, I suppose, that could be determined. but that they're provided a basic income, and that it also gives credit to their Social Security.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that income is like income that, yeah. I would support that.
Oh, good. Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's for centuries women's work. That's often, it's not all women, I mean, in this case, but sometimes I think sexism allows the society to not compensate work that really ought to be compensated. Yes. I mean, things that traditionally women have done that the system benefits, because you raise children, you take care of the elderly, and that, I think, is part of why that's not compensated, because it's been done by women.
Yeah. Might I add something? Oh, sorry, Courtney, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to finish with that's part of why I didn't call it a woman's basic income, a caregiver's basic income, because I do know male caregivers.
Yes, yeah. I've been one myself, actually, but I was also working full time, but yeah.
To give you an example of how sexism is behind this, it's when programming first became a thing, computer programming, most of the programmers were women, because you had to like punch in cards and put in, it was manual work, a lot of it. And it was paid at very low costs. As soon as men started entering the industry, it became more lucrative. And suddenly, even there's less women in IT than men are. Like, the work that generally women do, any industry that is dominated by women, teaching, nursing, hospitality, caregivers work, all of that is like miserably funded. And it contributes to the wage gap by a huge amount.
Yeah, without that, I think capitalism depends on that very fact. It's a pillar that the system rests on. This is why, if we want livable wages for all, including all the women who are in those occupations, we got to get rid of capitalism.
Yep. Steve, I have a question based on one of the answers you gave. You said if we close down the Pentagon, a lot of money would be released to do a lot of things that we want. Talking about material conditions right now, at least by 2020, 2030, it's not, I don't think we are going to be able to get all the war hawks or people paid, or at least publicly financed, or sort of get the influence of military industrial complex out of Congress. So in the meantime, if you had to, like, how would you fund it if you could not get the Pentagon to shut down? Because that's how it is right now. Like, there's not enough socialists in Congress. There's not enough anti-war people in the Congress. So how would you pay for it if we couldn't close the Pentagon as of now? For example, universal basic childcare.
Yeah, well, we got to find out where the money's going. I mean, I would always argue to continue to argue for shutting down the military, in large part because of what it does to working people in other countries and how it damages the working people from this country who go fight them. But like in your scenario where you can't stop that right away, where would you get it? I mean, I would start off repealing that ridiculous tax cut that they just passed and increase the taxes dramatically on corporations. I don't know why they were complaining that the 30% was too high. I mean, did any of them actually pay that rate that they said was so high? No. So then they had to cut the rate. I mean, in the end, corporate taxes used to be like 70%, like 50 years ago, and they never went out of business. And there's been an enormous concentration of wealth. It's like in the last 40 years, the productivity of workers has doubled, right? And yet their standard of living has gone down or been flat or gone down. So there's all this extra wealth being created. Somebody's got the money. It ain't us. So we can find the people who got the money and we can fund all this stuff. That's what I think.
Okay.
So I had a question on, so you're running as a freedom socialist.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So can you explain what this party in essence means? What's like the top 3 issues they champion?
Well, it is a socialist feminist party. So it is both seeing the connection between the struggle for socialism and the struggle for women's rights. And so the top issue is get rid of capitalism and create a social society that produces for people's needs instead of profits for the 1%. Now our party has a concept that is called revolutionary integration, and we also have feminism, and both of those are about the leadership of the most oppressed. And so we see that the women's movement and the women's struggle for justice is always going to be pushing the movements forward, as well as the people of color struggles. And those are super important struggles because they provide leadership to the working class. And they break down the divisions in the working class so that the working class can unite and fight for a fair and just world. We cannot do it. And so we have to fight racism and sexism, homophobia, and discrimination of all kinds so that we can unite working people. And then we can start to achieve justice for all of us. But we tie those two struggles together very strongly. And I think our party was innovative of that. It used to tell us that, feminism was a bourgeois movement. Feminism divides the working class. Well, now everybody's a feminist, right? But,
Yeah. We're not quite there yet, but yeah.
It's claiming to be, but you're not if they're, yeah.
Yep.
Right.
So, Steve, in your view, how would you achieve socialism legislatively? Like, are there any pieces, like, how do you think we approach this if you're elected?
Basically, what I try to do is I do not think we will achieve it legislatively. I am a revolutionary socialist. In the end, the working people are going to have to wage the mass general strikes and exercise their power as a class to wrest the power from the capitalists. But in the legislative arena, we can put forth transitional demands that are going to make sense to working people and make them think, wow, why do we have to have the messed up situation we have when we can do things like public ownership of the banks? How much better that would work for just regular working folks, and national, socialized medicine and, nationalizing the energy industry so that we can immediately implement a transition to sustainable energy sources and, reduce emissions. And these things are all going to make sense. And so those are things you can fight for and that move people left to a more socialistic viewpoint. They can also defend people too. We have to defend things like Social Security and Medicare. And we need to realize that the mass movement is what's needed to defend it. And so you would be in Congress or something, but also building a mass movement.
Yep. So I wonder if you've heard about the bill. I heard about it from Dr. Richard Wolff when he talked about, like, the end goal is workers owning the means of production. So legislatively, a way of doing that is introducing a bill that would require first right of refusal before any sale, merger, or acquisition of a company. The first right of refusal must be given to the workers if they want to purchase their company, resume ownership of it, and supplement it with a public investment bank to help workers because they cannot afford, obviously, to buy the business, to give low interest loans. So I feel like legislatively, that's a great way to transition power to the workers. I wonder what you think about that.
It sounds like it makes sense. I don't know. Under a capitalist framework, they would need assistance to purchase it. In a revolutionary situation, I think we would just take it. And but I would say that makes a lot of sense.
But just like considering modern monetary theory, it has, like we know based on the kind of system that we have, that if money is put into public works program, and something that gives return back when we invested in the people, then that's not essential, like really money. Like it's the money, the wealth is created and it goes to the workers, and the return comes back when we invest in education or infrastructure. So if we were to give like maybe 0% loans for workers going to buy their own own way. I basically I agree with you that that end needs to be there. I was just saying that there is a way to do it legislatively, in my opinion, while at the same time fighting the fight in the streets and organizing strikes and creating class awareness. That's why I brought it up.
Are you going off the experience? I've heard of this cooperative movement that they do sometimes in South America, I think. And
Yeah.
is that, I haven't really looked closely at that, but, sometimes you have to do what works under the situation.
Yep. All right, that's all I had for now.
Thanks.
All right, sorry, I was on mute. Sorry, I'm going through my notes here. Oh, some of the things I ask all the candidates that we talk with is kind of explaining what you've done in your community, what experience you've had in your community, what have you shown up for, any nonprofits that you back, just kind of an overall outlook on how you have been working within your community and how long you've been in your community, I guess, here in Washington State as well.
Well, I've been in Washington State for over 30 years. I've been mostly very involved in unions and very active in unions and pushing unions to take on issues like opposing the wars and supporting women's rights. I've worked closely with Radical Women. It's a socialist feminist organization that combines the issues of women and working people in unions and rallies support for both. As I said before, I've organized rallies in commemoration of I've helped organize rallies with Coalition of Black Trade Unionists and the May Day March last year with the May 1st Action Coalition, as I was part of that. And I was criticized for criticizing my opponent, Maria Cantwell, on the floor of the Labor Council. And I had announced my candidacy at a meeting, and I had said that Maria Cantwell is a big business, pro-corporate Democrat. She fights for wars and free trade agreements and things like that, supported Bill Clinton's third way thing. And somebody was very upset that from a guy from the Sailors Union that I had said that Maria Cantwell was not like a pro-labor candidate. But he had to start by saying, Steve Hoffman is a strong labor guy. He's been at all of our pickets. You've known but I just have to disagree with his characterization of Maria Cantwell. But he had to say that thing, as I have been to almost every picket.
Right. I really like this pro-peace movement, the anti-war. How do you, now that, more people are waking up to how many wars we're actually in without Congress, declaring these.
Yeah,
right. How you've been in the thick of things for so long. How can we start truly getting a movement going this day and age?
Well, I think we need to recognize the role of the Democratic Party. Even those that did not vote for the Iraq War, time and time again, voted to continue funding it. Right. And so they're not really a resistance to the war. And often they're very supportive of it. Right. And so what we need to keep in mind is we have to build a mass movement against the war and educate about it, but we also have to have political independence for that movement. And so I am for an independent Labor Party, because I also think that the Labor Party would be against war and would be independent of the two parties that are funded and controlled by the bosses. And so that's a big part of that struggle, because I often feel like we had the biggest protests ever against the Iraq War. I mean, they were protesting in the Antarctic Circle and everything, right? And so then, but as soon as the Democrat got elected, that's going to take care of thing, and everything just kind of deflates. And everything gets sucked into the Democratic Party, and pretty soon you're in the longest war in US history. So I think that's part of an aspect I think that most people don't think of, other than just revitalizing the movement and getting out in the streets. I think this exercising some political independence is important.
Wonderful. While we are on foreign policy, I'm sorry, we were not on foreign policy. I would like to bring us on foreign policy.
Yeah.
What do you think about the Israel-Palestine issue, and how would you legislate, vote, or what would you advocate for if you were elected?
I definitely would advocate stopping the occupation, and we certainly do not need to fund it as the United States and give military aid to Israel. We got to stop providing political cover for them when they come under criticism from most of the rest of the world in the UN for the brutalities of the occupation and for the increased settlements and all that. And we always vote with them and support them when they're oppressing other working people in Palestine. I think the real future for Israelis and Palestinians is a joint socialist Palestinian-Israeli state that has equal rights for everyone, that the discrimination goes away.
So you are for a one-state solution?
A socialist state. Now, the two-state solution, if that's what they can achieve, but I think it would probably be a step forward, but I don't know that that's achievable at this point. They have to build that movement that crosses class solidarity between Israeli workers and Palestinian workers, because it doesn't look like they can ever achieve a two-state solution, you know.
It's getting bad every day. The more the time passes, the more like if you look at the Israeli-Palestinian map right now, there's like just pockets of Palestinian areas. Everything else has been occupied by Israel. And there are some left-wing advocates in Israel who do advocate for a two-state solution going back to the 1967 borders. I wonder what you think about that.
I don't think it's the ultimate answer, but if they could achieve that and get all those, you know, they got to stop the settlements. They got to stop all the checkpoints and all the. You see, it's what they have in West Bank is viable because of what you say. So a first step could be to shut down all those checkpoints and those settlements, and tell the people in the settlements they have to live with the Palestinians and treat them as human beings. Period.
Have good faith conversations, like both sides, like they have to stop doing what they're doing right now, clearly violating human rights, for there ever to be a two-state solution, if it is even possible at this stage.
Right. Yep. Yeah. But the discrimination, the settlements and all that have to stop. I know a friend who she's from Palestine. She's part of our party from Israel. She's an Israeli Jew. And she says that the amount of racism in Israeli society is getting pretty bad in Israel. That's where her family is from. And people are opposing the Israeli state. And it's a hope that workers realize what an oppressive thing is and start to rise up against it.
And one last question on foreign policy, sorry, because it's Senate. Talked about, we know the propaganda that's being pushed about Iran being the single greatest threat to the United States, while we know it's all about our petrodollar and them not wanting to play our games. So, but considering that a right-wing government is currently in power in Iran, what would your outlook be if you ever had to vote for Iran? How would you secure stability in the region? How would you legislate where Iran is concerned?
Well, it's not the job of the U.S. military to secure stability anywhere. It doesn't. When it goes in, it blows everything up. They created the Taliban to fight the Soviets, and then that was a huge blowback and messed up everything later. I mean, their intentions are not to protect their corporate profits. And so I would not be in support of sending troops anywhere or bombing anybody. And I would go back to just to put the perspective on it, I would go back to what Martin Luther King said in his speech against the Vietnam War in the Riverside Church in 1967. And he said, the US government is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. And I think that is true today, 50 years later, as much as it was then.
I thank you.
Thanks.
Before we go on to another my question, we have our guys been hanging out, Oz and Brian. I'd like to give you guys an opportunity to come in and ask some questions.
All right.
Hi, Steve. How you doing?
All right. How are you?
Brian. I got in here a little late. Sorry about that. I was tending to the family, making dinner and stuff. What you were saying about the childcare earlier actually really rang a bell with me, because I would really appreciate something like that in my current predicament. Having some sort of support structure for parents would be amazing. So I really support that. One thing that I want to know is what are you going to be doing on a national level to help curb our dependence on fossil fuels?
Well, my main demand would be to nationalize the energy industry and put it under workers' control and the community's control. Because right now, it's just not going to work to do anything else. Because the energy corporations have invested an enormous amount of money in their drilling rights and their equipment, and they're going to use that stuff to extract and to pollute, right? And because they're going to make money. We have to take it away from them and just do a total and gear the whole thing towards new sustainable energy sources like solar and wind and all that, and then retrain those workers and guarantee them jobs from the fossil fuel workers into the new economy. Now that is my goal, you know, and so what we need to do is build a movement for that, because obviously the current crew in Congress is not going to go for that. But I think it educates, you know, to make those demands, and whatever other, there are people who are trying. I think what we need most is a unity between the labor movement on this subject and environmental movement and the Native American communities. And that sometimes we have to stand up to those in labor who say these jobs and fossil fuels are our jobs, and you can't say anything about fossil fuels. But not everybody in labor agrees with that. So a lot of this is movement building outside of Congress, you know, but we do have to learn to work together so that we can. Right now, the leadership of the movement really is in the Native American tribes, really, and that should be acknowledged.
Yep.
Absolutely. We had Robert Satay come on Progressive Washington on Friday, and that was a great interview of what they're going through and what we can do to really garner support. We need to get everybody together, right?
Yeah.
Somebody needs to be the tip of the spear, though.
Yeah, but we got to be the shaft of the spear right with them, though. So they're going to be out on their own.
So in light of that, what would you do about coal? Because I keep seeing a lot of this stuff about coal keep popping back up, that they're going to bring coal plants back. I mean, that's just ridiculous in my opinion. How do we stop that?
Well, I don't think we should open any more coal plants. We should decommission them and replace them with sustainable energy sources. I mean, that's the whole point of the transition. And I would be opposed to more coal plants. I mean, they're like the worst thing you can do for the environment, right? And I don't think there's any such thing as.
They've actually shown it's just as bad as LNG as well. So between the methane leaks that you get from the LNG transportation system and the extraction methods that they use, it's just as bad as having coal plants, if not worse.
Yeah, I really support the Puyallup tribe's fight in Tacoma to stop that LNG plant there, you know. And I catch flack for this in a labor council too. But I hold a consistent position. You can ask them all.
Yes, in Tacoma, labor has a mixed view on the LNG plant as well.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Unfortunately. And so, do you have? I don't know any specific questions to ask about tribal issues, or but I'm interested in any thoughts you have on it. And then also, to me, it also leads to DACA and immigration issues in relation, because tribal people can cross the Canadian border with like impunity. Like I don't know the exact rules, but they have fluid travel over the northern border. but Native Americans who are native from south of the border don't have free, there's no permeable border there for them. And
Right.
so all of that.
So on the borders thing, I mean, I like the sign I sometimes see in immigrant rights protests. It's usually carried by young people, and it says, "We didn't cross the border crossed us." And what is the border to working people? It's just a way to keep us divided, right? And it's a way to pit us against each other and a race to the bottom. I'm for open borders. The borders were open until about 1924, and then, except for the notable exception of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was a racist raid on that community to expel them, but pretty much for everybody else, it was open, right? So why do we need these borders? Is because, they set up the doors and super exploit somebody on the other side of the border. And so DACA, and they should pass a clean DACA bill that doesn't make it easier and should not include anything about redoing the immigration systems to make it easier to deport their parents. That's what's on the table now. And that's outrageous. As far as the tribal issues, I just think we have to acknowledge the leadership of the tribes in the movements. Like, it's amazing that the Lummi tribe was able to stop that Cherry Point coal terminal, right? And so what we need to be doing is working with them and supporting them. And I firmly believe in Native American tribal sovereignty, and that has to be really respected. And after several hundred years of genocide, I just think we need to go the other way.
I totally agree. Oz, do you have some questions for Steve? All right.
Yeah, I've got a couple. I can get a soundtrack first. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, okay. I'm out in the dead zone and it's satellite. Steve, thanks for doing this tonight, first of all. And I want to go back to your statement about the labor representatives condemning your so-called attack on Maria Cantwell. Challenging an incumbent senator is an incredible and courageous thing in this day and age of our corrupted political systems. I want to commend you on that. And I'd just like to hear your thoughts on this. The website Freedom Socialist Party did a section in here, and I'm wondering if this was a quote from you, and let me read it briefly. A tale of two candidates. Millionaire Maria Cantwell began her political career in the mid-1980s. A committed advocate for free trade, she lost the seat in the House of Representatives in 1995 after one term, which she voted for NAFTA. Yeah. After a stint as senior vice president of Real Networks, a tech company based out of Seattle, she was elected to the Senate in 2000. Cantwell is part of a rightward swing of the Democratic Party that Bill Clinton was key to sharpening. She supports Clinton's third way, describing its popularizers and a progressive alternative to worn out dogmas and traditional liberalism. Cantwell also voted for the Iraq War and CAFTA. She opposes Medicare for all and nixed the tweaks to Obamacare that would have made it more inclusive. She voted in favor of the 2007 Comprehensive Immigration Act, for which would have included security provisions akin to Trump's big, beautiful wall. She's an uber promoter of fracking and a Zionist Israel. She said A to reauthorizing the Patriot Act in 2006 and nay to closing the Guantanamo Bay prison. The end of that question is, Steve, did you not try and push back a little bit on that labor leader, or were you just respecting the environment?
Well, as far as the first thing, I did not write that article, but there's nothing in there that I disagree with. I mean, I think it's all factual, and so it's amazing. That's why I'm criticizing her on the labor counts, and I only have 3 minutes to announce my campaign, and you know, the rules are very tight in the Labor Council. So I announced my Labor Council candidacy and why I'm running, and then gave the very briefest summary of all the stuff that was in that article you just read. And so when I was criticized, it was, I know the guy, you know, I mean, he's a good trade unionist. So many of them are tied to the Democratic Party. And so what I'm trying to do here is to offer an alternative. That's why I'm very strong on also building an independent labor party, because we need a working class party that's not controlled by the bosses. And we've been in this situation, and you know, how did I push? I didn't have a chance to push back. He was just saying under the last part of the meeting called Good and Welfare. He says his piece after I say mine. I talked to him. He tried to convince me to run for another seat that didn't have supposedly somebody good like me. He was defending her because she defended the Jones Act, and he is in a sailors union, and that's important to them. I'm not sure all the reasons why, though I know there's a lot of problems with the Jones Act. So, you know, it's like, so labor's perspective is too narrow. They practice something called business unionism, which is taking care just of their industry, in collusion with their bosses, and they don't represent the whole working class. And that's what we need to change the labor movement, so it sees itself as representing the entire working class, not just a narrow sector that is their members. You know, so it's a battle that's in the labor movement. It's an ideological battle in the labor movement, and there are people on both sides of the question. So does that, I don't know, did I push back? I didn't do it, you know, I talked to people afterwards, basically. That's the rules are kind of
that was a great response, and it was kind of a catch-22 question for you because of the format that you were in. I guess what I'm trying to say is that many of us are advocating putting a positive spin on negative campaigning and using that to I'm going to call you an underdog in this situation, because we have these kinds of races all over the state with Democrats and independents. Tamarine Borelli and Sarah Smith's running as a Democrat in the 9th district. And what we're finding is we need to figure out a way to talk to labor in a way that's going to win them over to candidates such as yourself. And I definitely I support you and what you're saying here. And that's the thought I'd like to impart here to you, just from my opinion, and the years that I've been involved in campaigning and helping people with campaigns, is what you have is all that information about Maria Cantwell and more, I'm sure, that the average voter does not hear or get. And I'm just suggesting that all the candidates consider that more. And because the newer generation is tired of the same old business as usual. And what do you think about that as an opinion? I think the new generation, the younger generation, I hate to be ageist, but it's true, are tired of the same old thing that they've heard forever and ever. And they want the right, fresh ideas from candidates who are going to actually walk their talk.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying, you know, go harder after these politicians. Yeah, I think I get that from a lot of people, and I have to do better at that, quite honestly, because it's a balance between getting out ideas of working class independence and taking on the economic system. And then oftentimes, do I want to spend all that time taking on, you know, talking about the opponent, but I have to, right?
Talking about issues, like when you mention something, you can just say, and here's how Maria Cantwell has voted so far. Like, just anytime you have issues, make sure people know where she stood too, so they can compare you in contrast and don't have to go look it up.
Yeah, like talking about sustainable transition, you can say my opponent is a big supporter of fracking, you know, and so
yeah, she is.
Yeah, you bring it up and kind of tie it in as you go, and that's a good idea.
Yeah, well, she's getting support from the what have we seen lately from the Sierra Club about environmental scorekeeping of 100%? I wanted to vomit. I mean, this woman was out for fracking in such a big way, plus all the other things that you said. But lastly, I'd like to say, Steve, I don't think it would be a bad idea to reach out to other candidates like Tamborine Borelli and Sarah Smith and Dorothy Gasquet and just communicate on the messaging. And like Saprit says, you have to corner these politicians and show them what they're actually doing and get rid of this mystique that the labor has and other centrist thinking Democrats have, because that's the only way we're going to be able to educate. And running for office gives you that platform, and you're in it for the long goal, the long gain, not just the game, it's the gain. So whatever you do in this cycle, and I would love it if you won, it will be good for the next cycles on down the road. And thanks for letting me ask these questions, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I think the thing too is about labor is you have to orient to the rank and file and not think of labor as a leadership, because the leadership is often very disconnected from the rank and file. The rank and file of my own union local has endorsed my campaign very enthusiastically, actually. And it was a no-brainer for them because they know what I stand for and they know what my opponents stand for. But yeah, I think it'd be good to continue working with you all and continue this discussion. And I think I probably could be helpful in with an orientation to labor because I've been so involved in it for so long.
Oh, you definitely can.
A lot of political experience in the local movements.
So you guys said you have the backing of your local labor union. What other backing have you gotten so far? I know you're, more freshly announced, so you may not have a long list, but who else is excited about your run?
Radical Women endorsed me.
Love that.
And Organized Workers for Labor Solidarity endorsed me. They're the ones that put on the Freedom Foundation picket in Bellevue, and they're kind of like the scrappy part of the labor movement in Seattle area anyway.
Nice.
Two official endorsements other than my own union. I've spoken to several. I've spoken to Carpenters Union. They haven't decided yet. I've spoken to state employees, local 843, DSHS workers, Furcrest workers, Furcrest School. But I don't know, I sense a certain reticence because this campaign, unlike sort of maybe local races, when you're going up against the Senate, Congress is highly partisan. And it's like a very direct challenge to the Democratic Party. And the leadership gets nervous about that. And then so the people in a local union, sometimes you can get a local union, but they worry about blowback by supporting somebody other. Like our union is, both the national union is supposed to decide the endorsement because this is a federal race. And so my union, I told my political director, and he said, well, you might get some blowback if you endorse somebody else, and I thought, well, our local does blowback all the time, right? We have a blowback quota, right? If we're not getting blowback from the higher levels of the union, we got to wonder what we're doing wrong.
Oh, I love that.
So that's the way we roll.
By the way, we noticed the same thing in the Sarah Smith campaign, where a union, when she meets with them, they're like, I wish you were in any other race. We can't endorse you in this race because Adam Smith has changed his vote on TPP. I was like, you had to call him to change his vote? That should tell you something.
So another big movement that's happening now is the anti-corruption movement. Have you heard of the American Anti-Corruption Act and Represent Us?
No. I'd like to find out about it.
Yes. So it's something that's near and dear to my heart. I'm part of a local chapter. But the American Anti-Corruption Act is a series of provisions. So we're looking to bring, ranked choice voting or
that's right.
Yeah. Of course, automatic registration, same day registration, talks about gerrymandering. There's a lot of laws that were in place that were started taken out little bit by little bit since the 1970s. So looking at putting those back in place that protected our voice as voters. So what I'll do is I'll send you some information on that. And I think you'd really love it. And I'd recommend you signing, endorsing this act. They don't endorse candidates. It's a nonpartisan, but it is all about anti-corruption. Yeah, I'll send you that. It's beautiful. So once you win this race and become senator, what legislation do you know that you'd sign on to right away, or is there some in particular that you would want to help create?
Well, I hope. I would support Medicare for all. Let's go for it. Let's build a movement. Let's turn up the heat, right? So that's kind of like, even though I think it'd be better to have a totally socialized medicine and not have, beyond even single payer, I think it would be a big advance, I think, and then as far as what's on the table now, a clean DACA bill that just says DACAs, they're made citizens. They're just no increased deportations of their parents, no border walls. I would filibuster anything like that. There might be a lot of resistance, like I'm very much of a labor candidate, and if they were to try to get rid of the Davis-Bacon Act, which requires paying prevailing wages on federally funded projects, I would filibuster that as long as it took, because that is just going to wipe out the construction trade unions, and we can't do that. I don't want to drive on bridges that are built by non-union labor and scab contractors who cut corners. So anyway, so there's plenty of things, but my platform, which I don't even have near me, I don't know if you guys have, but there's a lot of stuff like that are bigger things, like nationalizing the industry, but what about repealing that tax? Just at least repealing that tax cut. We can start with that. That's pretty simple.
Right, and that's a great start for sure. All right, thank you so much. Anybody else have a question?
I was wondering what sort of committees that you're looking at maybe getting involved in if you get elected.
Oh gosh, I haven't thought that far ahead. If there's anything that could stop any committee where I could rail against the war, I think I'd want to be on that. So I don't know what.
To start, very welcome place to start.
So is there, I don't know the names of the committees, but if there were a labor committee, a labor standards committee, I would want to be on that too. But I don't know how all that is determined, but.
Yeah, I think it's who you know.
Yeah.
At this point, right?
So have you heard of IC? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Oz.
No, I just on that, and please ask him about the healthcare thing. I'd want you on the Armed Services Committee, Steve.
Oh, okay.
I really would, because if you think about it, if we transitioned our military into rebuilding the infrastructure and redirected that money into the infrastructure, I would say within 10 years, we could completely rebuild the United States infrastructure with everything that they have: manpower, women power, people power from the military, and the budget that keeps going into that every year. One point, do you know how much the Russians spend on their military per year versus the United States?
What I do know is the United States spends more money on its military than I thought it would. It was like more than the next 8 countries combined, including Russia, China, India, several of our allies. And then when they passed that latest budget deal, they actually gave more money when they folded like the Democrats folded like a cheap suit on DACA, and then they passed this budget thing, and they gave more money to the Pentagon than even they asked for. And now I think we're spending more than the next 11 countries combined. I don't know how much.
Yes. Yes. $46 billion a year. The United States has just okayed $160 billion over the next 2 years. And thanks, Rhonda, for letting me cut in real quick. Go ahead and continue with your great question.
Oz, you are always welcome anytime. So you were talking about you would sign on to this Medicare for All, idea. So have you heard about I-1600 here in Washington State from Hull, Washington?
Yeah, I've heard about that. I want to look into that because I'm a little worried on the revenue source and whether it might end up being a regressive tax. But our organization hasn't had enough time to quite totally look into that. We're doing that right now. The idea of the universal health care we totally support. So I don't know if you can tell me anything about that.
Yeah, actually, one of the main sources is actually from a capital gains.
Right.
Part when it comes to employer based, the ones that are paying out now, they're paying about 18%. That'll drop down to about 7% of their payroll. And there'll be a 1% income tax just across the board to help, supplement from everybody. I know that there was one thing that they were really watching for when they were building this. Gerald Friedman did the economic study, was making sure it wasn't regressive, that it wasn't coming, out of hurting anybody that's already hurting. And there's a couple other things in there too. I just don't have it off the top of my head, but the main source is going after that capital gains tax.
Yeah. I would be worried about the income tax if it applied to everybody, but if there was some floor where people didn't have to pay it, or I wonder if the 1% may be, I don't know, I'd have to look at it. It may be less money for me because I have an insurance copay. If my insurance copay premium went away, it may be,
it does go away. The copay and the premiums do go away. The 1% kicks in after the first $15,000 that everybody makes. So after $15,000, then the 1% kicks in. And there's a 1% across the board. In Washington State, it's unconstitutional to have
graduated.
Right. So after that 15,000, even those that make hundreds of thousands of dollars, they still get that first 15,000 that doesn't get that 1%. And then so after that, it's a 1% off of that. It doesn't include that 15%. 15,000. It's above there that they take that 1% out. So it does kind of open up the door more on level playing grounds. People that make over 200 of the federal poverty line, that's where they might have some sort of a premium, and it's no more than $250 a year, $200, $250 a year. And same thing with medications, no copays unless you choose a name brand when there's a generic available, and that's up to 200 tops for the year. But otherwise your copays and those big premiums, you don't have.
So that might be, you might be money ahead. I mean, yeah. So I don't know what lower wage people, maybe they're paying more than that for their Affordable Care Act stuff. Yeah, when they count in all the copays, because through the ACA, they're probably getting pretty crummy plans. And so if they ever have to use it or get medicines, they're paying big.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'll look at all that and we'll analyze it. And thanks for the information. Oh. I signed it. It was being circulated because it just looks so good. Sorry, but now.
Yeah, really, if you guys can take a look at it and really go through it, I think you guys would be behind it. It really, first some people like DSA are having some worries saying that it's not like a single payer because it ends up, they think it's a, I forget what it's called. It'll be one of the choices until 50 plus. What?
Public option.
Thank you. they see it as a public option, which at first it kind of looks that way until you get 50+1 people to enroll, then it goes across the board. So like when you're choosing, like people who are on Medicare now, they choose a supplementary or, the Part B. It would be one of those options. It's better coverage for less, and they would actually get the reimbursement of that premium that they would do normally. And then once 50+1 people enroll, then the whole state gets covered and it ends up being that single payer.
50+1% of the people, or just 50+1 people?
If I understand it, 50% plus one. So 50%
plus one person, right?
Yes. So, and when the options are up there, it is a better all coverage plan for a lot less money. So we're assuming that it's going to happen pretty quickly when you have those options to choose from.
We'll have to educate because there'll be a lot of propaganda against it by insurance.
It is already starting. Yeah. So we need education badly. So yeah, if your Freedom Socialist Party wants to take a look at that and help out with helping the education that we're trying to do as well, we'll be most appreciative once you guys get a good look. We can also have somebody come and talk to your group too.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, guys.
Have we talked about Me Too at all today?
Nope.
Okay. So can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So in light of Me Too, how would you address sexual harassment in your own office? Do you have any plans on, first in the Congress, we have seen, because each office takes care of their own sexual harassment complaints, that a lot of them don't go properly reported and there's not proper actions taken. How would you address it if you're elected?
Well, usually these things, there needs to be an independent investigative agency that investigates any complaints, right? There needs a place for women to go, or men for that matter, to something that's totally independent of Congress, right? And it has enforcement teeth, and can subpoena witnesses and everything like that. And then there should be no taxpayer money to be used to pay settlements. I mean, that's just ridiculous. These people are all millionaires anyway. They get the money. They act like jerks. They can pay for it themselves. Why should our tax dollars be used to pay off a settlement for their hideous behavior?
Yep. Sort of an independent HR office in the Capitol Hill, right? Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah. The HR office, in my experience in the union movement and working with radical women who's working with this group called Seattle Silence Breakers, which is city employees raising this issue and trying to push the city to take more affirmative action to stop it. And HR is not your friend. You have to organize with your fellow workers, and hopefully with your union should be supporting you. And then you have to realize that HR, but you're probably using the term HR as some kind of independent. Yeah,
I just didn't know what to call it.
Yeah, HR is not independent, but some kind of
independent office that investigates sexual harassment complaints.
Yeah, it has to be funded, and be independent.
And possibly unionize all workers in the Capitol Hill too.
Oh yeah, sure.
All right. Any other questions for Steve? We're over an hour now, and we can stay on too.
I'm done.
Steve, do you have a little time?
Yeah, sure. I have some time.
Well, I was just wondering if you have any suggestions for like agricultural issues on a national level.
Well,
like with food subsidies and all the way to additives, or all the way, and to GMOs.
Sustainable agriculture and permaculture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of direct experience of that, but I know that from reading about what happens all over the world, it's like the use of pesticides and fertilizers reaches a diminishing point where it's actually like the overall productivity of land start to go down now because they have to add more fertilizers and more pesticides. And I think we need to support, like I know we need to learn from local people. Like in those countries in Africa, they plow up everything and make it into big plantations, and it displaces all these women farmers who have the knowledge of the local ecology, right? So what we need to do is support the campesina movement and those kind of movements of mainly women who have all that wisdom of the land, and that's who we should be learning from. And the university students can learn what they can in a lab, but they can also talk to these women and learn a lot that way. But the whole system, I think, is I'm worried about what they put in our food. It needs to be better regulated too. That's it's a whole thing of deregulation. I'm sure applies. I think they put heavy chemicals, heavy metals and shit into some of these fertilizers and stuff.
I would encourage people to start growing their own food, actually, and having free training courses on how to get people more involved in growing their own food and starting local economies based off of that sort of infrastructure of people actually engaging with the land.
Mm-hmm. We have this thing called the food farm in Seattle. No, food forest.
Yeah.
It's in Beacon Hill. I've never been. I should go up there and talk to them and see what it's like.
Heck yeah, you should. That would be a great start. Start garnering some support up there.
We have a food forest in Tacoma as well, and so you'll hear the word permaculture again and again once you start tiptoeing into these crowds. And I have to say, you can implement small acreage of permaculture and see dramatic precipitation changes in arid climates. And so if you could, China did it on a huge scale. So and I think there's a movie called Greening the Desert, but
Greening the Desert,
I believe so. And then and that'll actually pull up probably a number of permaculture resources, but China did it to a very large valley high in the mountains, and it stabilizes environments. You can reverse desertification implementing this kind of knowledge. And so I like to advocate for our military becoming a permaculture renewal.
A humanitarian force.
Yeah, humanitarian.
Yeah, right.
Permaculture humanitarian force. So I am so glad to hear you say, at least about the food forest, and you'll reach out maybe.
Yeah, I'd be just interested in. I think it sounds fascinating the way they plant the different kind of plants so that the bugs don't go across that plant because they don't like that plant. And it's just this whole like integrated system of not having to use pesticides, just with totally natural methods.
The world within a world within a world. It's lovely.
Yeah.
I like to think of it as a closed loop system, and it's maximizing natural patterns to create abundance.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's I feel like that might be the simplest way to get the vastness of it across, but it's got a series of solutions for every environment, and much of it is through looking at what happens not just in nature, but how people have been utilizing nature in indigenous space.
Yeah. Right.
So it's not new. It's not new white dudes.
Yeah, right.
It's just like newly organized by white dudes.
Yeah. Or women usually organize everything, but okay.
Well, there's a growing women's presence in permaculture, but permaculture has been distinctly white male for.
Oh, has it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, something about that.
but there's more diversity happening all the time.
Good.
So it's getting disseminated.
So what are your thoughts on hemp?
Hemp? You know, I was certainly for the legalization of marijuana, but hemp is a different. I don't know a lot about hemp. Apparently, it has an enormous amount of useful uses, and those were not able to be done because there was this prohibition against marijuana, right? But I definitely think there's medical value to marijuana, and you know, I'm not for prohibition, and I'm for be defending legalized marijuana.
If you get a
different question about hemp, then I'm totally missing the boat on hemp.
Well, if you get a chance, look at the history on hemp. Pre-World War II, it was actually one of the foundations of our economy, and a lot of the shipping industry and a lot of the there's a lot of other industries that used hemp, and the tensile strength that it has is very adequate for making ropes and canvas, and it can be made into paper products. I mean,
hempcrete.
Yeah, hempcrete, plastics, resins, glues.
Like one of the strongest cars out there. They were able to make a car.
Yep. There's a Senate candidate.
It has so many applications that they outlawed it.
You guys know a lot more about hemp than I know.
I mean,
there's a Senate candidate in West Virginia, Paula Jean Swearengin, who is advocating for hemp to be grown on mountaintops that have been blown off for coal to stop erosion of soil. Paula Jean Swearengin is her name, and she's advocating for hemp marijuana to be legalized because it will help stabilizing the mountaintops that have been removed and give something to the local economy other than coal.
Right,
that's fastest growing crops out there.
Yeah, it can be. Man, so
the
many.
The potential of it is so fast.
I do want to have a hyper Washington suggestion. Eastern Washington is. The structure, the people, the powers that be are balking at, sorry about my washing machine. They are balking at marijuana being grown in their communities.
Oh.
But the coast is pretty open to it.
Yeah.
Well, we could, if we stop logging along the coast through the whole state, we can maybe offer loggers the opportunity to have cooperative indoor grow ops. And then, because also pot and hemp shouldn't really be grown too closely together, because if you cross pollinate them, you can mess one of them up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the pot. You don't want to mess up the pot. But then, I think industrial hemp will go over better in the conservative areas of Washington. So I have a very Washington, it's a very divided solution. It's a 2-state solution. It's a 2-plant.
2-state, 2-hemp state solution.
Yeah. That's right.
We should give Steve an option to plug in his sites and where to donate and stuff.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, Steve, if you don't mind, go ahead and give a good spiel. Your stump speech, shortened up, where people can find you, how they can help you too. What are you needing help with? Just so everybody knows where they can go.
Well, my stump speech is basically I'm running for as a Freedom Socialist Party candidate for Maria Cantwell's U.S. Senate seat, because I think working people need a working person like myself, a union militant and shop steward who will fight for them instead of somebody who will just keep taking care of the rich. So I mean, the rich run Congress now, and we need to put an end to that. And I hope my campaign can also help build a movement to defend things like workers' rights, unions, civil rights and civil liberties, voting rights, public services that are being taken away, being gutted, while 1 in 8 people in the country live in poverty, 1 in 4 children live in poverty, many of them homeless. And I really want to just rail against one war after another. And so those are the kind of platforms that I'm doing, and I think I could do a good job because I know how to represent working people. I've been very involved in my union as a shop steward, representing people on the job, and as a local union officer. And I really feel that my platform has a lot of good demands to take on the profit system. It's based in the experience of the Freedom Socialist Party, which has a long tradition of building united fronts and coalitions with other organizations to defend workers and to take on the fascists and the ultralight and the Nazis and Klan types. So that's, where my experience and the kind of things I've been involved in, and I really could use support in my campaign. I have a petition I can send to people because I'm trying to get on the ballot, and I have to pay a big $1,740 fee, and I'm a state employee. I don't have that laying around. So I need people to sign my petition to get on the ballot. If I get enough signatures, I don't. And of course, people can donate. They can visit the camp. Right now, you can find a link to it on socialism.com, or they can call the campaign offices at 206-722-2453. And otherwise, I'm really looking for chances to speak to organizations too. I've been trying to speak to unions, mostly because that's who I know. I've been involved in so many unions, but I really like environmental groups, indigenous groups, women's groups, so an invitation to, because part of this is just to have a dialogue about what we need to do to change things in a fundamental way. So that.
How signatures do you need to get on the ballot?
I think it's 1,740, but we're going to go because a lot of those are not validated because they invalidated because they can't read them or this or that, or the person's not really registered to vote. So we're trying to get at least 2,500. I think we're more than halfway there already, but we want to keep going.
That's great.
I remember signing that. Doreen was at one of our events.
Yeah, I remember collecting signatures.
Yeah.
That really helps. It ends up being like $1 per signature.
Yeah, right.
And then you're going for federal. So of course we can do this statewide. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, right. It doesn't be in Tacoma or wherever. Right.
Okay, so I'll put a link in there. So in YouTube, there'll be links to your websites and stuff there. And I'll add a link to that form that people can download so they can print it off.
And maybe I'll have my Doreen, who's my campaign manager, I'll have her, she knows she can send you links, because I might not be right about socialism.com being the total link. So we have Facebook advocates for Hoffman, and I should be better off. I need to be much better on the social media thing.
Okay. The links I got did come in through your form that was filled out. So I think Doreen helped put those links in there. So they're the correct ones. Yeah. So I think we're good there. And that way, when people go back and watch this too, they can just go directly and hit those links to find you. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Steve. It was so nice for you to take this time out of your busy day. I know that you're so busy, but we really appreciate it. We do have the Progressive Party that's working with us now. The Justice Party reached out and wants to look at working on endorsements too. Of course, the Our Revolutions, the local Bernie-crats of Washington State, we're linked with them nationally. Same with Our Revolution. The Green Party, we have Green Party people in here that contribute. So hopefully, everybody's going to be able to take a look and really get to see all of our Senate candidates. We just really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate all your times. Thank you for all that you do for working people.
Oh, thank you for keeping fighting for the working people.
And the planet.
All right, I'll let you guys say goodbye where I run out there to take it off live.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you so much again.
Thanks.
It's been a pleasure.
Take care. Good seeing you again.
Is just making sure this goes off live. I'll go so and